And I got a lot of votes for the pour over, of course, handful for the French press, and then.
People don't know what they're talking about. Look at the Cuban thing.
I gotta try it.
I mean, when you said Europe, it was like.
That was the magic word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. It's
Mhm.
like, you go over there and you go.
You can chew it.
You go, well, this is like, why, why is this better? Why is this, it's like,
It just
the
is.
thing. And it could be like, the lamest little place has the coolest, they're all like.
It's the size is always off. It's just this little cute thing. But I'm like, man, give me 4 of those.
Right.
But that nice, it looks like sludge
Cafe
coming
Solo.
out.
Yeah.
I gotta try that.
Trust me.
Well, so we found our topic.
Coffee.
Coffee. That's gotta be right.
Should we start by just like saying who we are?
I was gonna say that. Yeah.
Just a little blurb about what are we gonna call ourselves?
Well, there's TED Talks, so there could be Tech Talk, Gear Guys. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Are any of those taken?
Who knows? Haven't thought about it.
Okay.
Here's my idea. What do I know about Michael Whittaker? Michael Whittaker is easily. I'm gonna blow some smoke here.
Please don't.
Probably one of the most talented people in Nashville. Easily one of the best keyboard players I ever heard. You do. What would you say you do? I mean, you do jazz. You do fusion.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think of when I think of Michael Whittaker. I think of
Right.
a guy that musical fireworks, for lack of a better word. You are a phenomenal keyboard player.
Well, my background definitely is jazz.
Yeah.
Actually, I went to school for orchestration, and but I played keyboards, everything from boy bands to to Jimmy Kimmel show. So as far as styles, I played all different kinds of styles, of course. But growing up in LA, but I think if I could just sit down and do anything, it's like. Hey, I'm a jazz guy.
Yeah.
I love jazz.
Yeah.
And classical, but I'm just nowhere near as good at classical as I am at jazz.
Well, I don't think anybody's as good at that as they would like to be. I know that's true for me.
And when I think about you, I think about you've been music director for Michael W. Smith for a long time, which is a huge gig.
Yeah.
And I first learned about you, I think. Not from that, it was more from just you're a fellow film composer guy and into technology and have that same nerd mindset I do. So so what else I mean and definitely a pop solid pop whatever rock piano guy. Yeah,
I'm definitely more straight ahead. I've always appreciated jazz, but I've never aspired to it, I guess is what I say. So I just never, sadly, I never learned as much of that language as I would like to know. So someday I need to come and take lessons from you when I have time.
Sometimes it's better you don't know.
Well, I think it's safe to say we've got a good, solid mutual respect for each other.
Absolutely.
And as far as I know, like we were saying before we started rolling, we're probably two of the keyboard nerds in town that have every sample library we can think of, all the commercial stuff, probably got a lot of private stuff. So we enjoy talking shop, and so that's.
And we get asked a lot of questions. I teach a film scoring class as well, and I think just people want to know what library to use, what computer you're using, how does this work, and from a technical standpoint and also from a composition standpoint. Yeah.
Before I forget, tell people where to find you online.
Online? Well, of course, Facebook. Michael Whittaker is my page, but
2 T's, 1 T, 2 T's.
Whittaker, yeah.
Okay.
And my band is the Bottom 40s. Should you want to?
And you should. That. You should.
And then my website is michaelwhittaker.net.
Okay.
Simple. What about yourself?
JimDaneker.com, Daneker, and on Facebook, same thing. Facebook/Jim Daneker.
Yeah.
So.
Cool.
Yeah. So, we're at your studio today called Velvet Cinema.
Velvet Cinema Studio, yeah. And there's a plug for that. VelvetCinemaStudio.com.
Yep.
VelvetCinemaStudio.com. Why did I name it that? Anyway, it's red.
Gee, I can't think of why.
It's pretty red. It's pretty much a ripoff of Hans Zimmer's studio. If you ever seen Hans' studio, it's like the sickest studio.
It's ridiculous.
I wanted a mini version of that.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you've done well. It looks awesome. I just got the tour, and it looks incredible. Favorite gear? Like what makes your rig your rig?
Well, I think for me, what I do using Vienna Ensemble Pro is really a key part of what I'm doing. So what that is having I use a Mac as my main computer, and my digital audio workstation, or DAW, is Digital Performer. And then right now I have 2 slave PCs that are slave to my Mac. So they take some of the load off of the Mac that way. I don't know what is different about my studio. I mean, it's definitely a composer-based studio. You know, it's like a lot of, you probably don't see the synthesizers, but there's like a load of synthesizers.
Yeah. So you're definitely a hardware guy. You like to have a wall full of keyboards.
I do. It's more of an obsession than I use them every day. I still use software synths a lot. Sure. And it's easier going back and pulling those up than a hardware synth. I've
noticed though, you do a lot of videos. You're always over at this wall over here, which we'll get a shot of. Why is that?
Well, because those 2 keyboards are like the signature sounds are in those keyboards. Yeah. So I tend to go for those a lot. Yeah. And it's like super funk patches ready to go. You know?
Awesome. What about favorite sounds, favorite sample libraries? What are you into lately?
Well, I really, it depends on what your, for what instrument you're talking about, but or what you're going for. But for orchestral libraries, I go to the Hollywood libraries quite a bit.
East-West?
The East-West, yeah. Even though they're very taxing, they have, a lot of what I do is like trailer-oriented stuff and big. Yeah. And for that epic sound, I just think they sound pretty amazing. Yeah. That and the Albion libraries, I think, are pretty stellar, you know.
Those are by Spitfire company from the UK, and the thing that makes those magic is they're recorded at Air Lyndhurst, which is one of the best film scoring rooms on the planet. That and Abbey Road.
And they're more like what is that the other library that it's
Symphobia.
Symphobia, thank you. That all you get a whole brass section split across the keyboards, which for like a real traditional guy may not be what you want, because you want to go and micromanage everything. Right. But these days, I think in scoring, it's become, you know, as far as getting a really a realistic sound, I think the micromanaging of all the parts has become less, because it actually sounds more realistic having the whole section recorded together.
Right.
You know, there's something to be said about that. What do you think?
Totally. I get asked about that one. Excuse me. The thing I like about what you're saying is Symphobia, as an example, and Albion. You got a room full of 40, 50, 60 guys all doing the same thing, whether it's strings and brass together or strings. It sounds different than 60 individual players, it's, you know, recorded separately. Right. It's a whole different sound. It's physics. You can't get around that. Right. You've got that interaction of all those players in the same room, exciting the room and the air, and it just, whole different sound. Yeah. And it's the project I'm working on right now. I'm using Symphobia. I've always used it a lot for sketching, because it's, for one, it's super inspiring to play.
Sure.
And then I find that when I used to kind of go back and, like you're saying, micromanage and paint by layer. I call it just taking maybe a line from LA scoring strings or whatever, and I'll still use those as my detail brush, so to speak, but it's nice to have that foundation. And there's times I'll just end up leaving that. I'm like, man, it sounds great, because there's the room that they recorded in sounds phenomenal, and it I don't know who said it. If it sounds good, it is good. You know, and I'm super, super picky about the way stuff sounds. Like I recorded my daughter last night, who's just turned 13. She's the first thing you're going to hear on my project. It starts with this very film score sounding.
Right.
Starts with this big low analog pad, and then you hear this angelic voice. It's my daughter. And I went and probably auditioned 6 of my high-end reverbs because, no, that one's not exactly right. That's not exactly right. Like, I kind of joke that my standards are what would be okay with my mom is here. What's okay with the general public is here.
Right.
And then what's okay with me is a whole other level. Like, I'm not happy. If I put this record out where most people would be okay with it, it'd be done by now.
Right.
But I'm doing it to my standards, you know, and I know you're the same way.
Especially when it's your own project.
Yeah, and so it's like every little nuance matters to me. Like the way reverbs interact, the way samples work with each other, you know, and that's why some of those libraries, to me, can be inspiring.
Yeah, and but they also save time. You brought up an interesting point about film scoring and working in film and television in general is, especially if you're working in TV or you're working in the library world, a lot of times there's incredible deadlines.
Yeah.
And so to micromanage, or when I say micromanage, I say, like, okay, I'm going to have first string, second, or first violin, second violins, etc. down the line, and to DVC all those parts and go through your computer and do all that. Not only does it take a massive amount of computer, but you know, if you did that, you would never finish by Friday.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's the great thing about these new combo libraries, I think.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And for a guy like you, you're just gonna have to probably live with it. You know?
Yeah, and it's the hardest thing. And as much as I say that, the other side of that coin is that, am I going to hear a difference? Yeah, but at some point you do have to draw the line and say, okay, Friday's coming. One of my favorite little behind-the-scenes thing is James Newton Howard, one of my favorite composers, did a thing for Yamaha years ago, and he was talking about the typical film scoring world. A lot of times a composer will get asked to come in and fill in for somebody else because of a schedule conflict or whatever. He was asked to come in, I think it was for, I don't know, it doesn't matter, King Kong maybe. I think Howard Shore was doing it. He couldn't finish for whatever reason. And so James talked about his typical day was he would start writing at 9 in the morning, go till midnight, so 15 hours later, hand it off to the orchestrator, who would work until 4 in the morning, and by 9 the next morning, 24 hours after it was written, parts would be on the stands and they're ready to hit record.
Wow.
And he was on that schedule for 9 weeks.
That's amazing.
It's crazy. You know,
well,
so
you brought up an interesting point, which I think people who are trying to get in film or maybe students, what is because you think of the composer as the orchestrator, and you mix it, they get confused. What's the difference between a composer, an orchestrator, an arranger, and a copyist?
Yeah.
You know.
I'm finding that out. They're vastly different jobs.
Yeah.
You know, I know for the project I'm doing right now, it's my own baby. I've wanted to do it for 20 years, and kind of as a learning experience. I don't think of myself as an orchestrator at all, but I wanted to take the first piece on the record and orchestrate it, and it took me really 3 to 4 days, and it's a 3-minute piece of music. And I turned it over to 2 of my friends who are actual orchestrators, and they both kindly said, "Jim, stick to what you do. let us do what we do," because it would be like them. Like, I'm really good at working with samples. I can create a really good sounding piece of music that most people would never be able to tell was not real.
Right.
You can do the same thing. So you know what goes into that. It would be like them, you know, those guys who they would say, they're not programmers.
Right.
It'd be like them saying, here's my sample orchestra, what do you think it needs? If I'm being honest, I'm going to say, bro, I'm just going to redo this from scratch, it'll sound better. It's the same thing in reverse. Like, there's so much, I got all my notes right.
Are you giving them your MIDI files, like, hey, this is my, and then having them break it down?
Yeah, and what I thought would be helpful, because this is the first time I've ever done it this way, I thought what would help is if I did as much of the orchestration as I can. So I actually wrote every part out, violins, violas, one and two.
This is for your own project.
For my own project. Yeah. Cellos, basses. And it was fun, and it was a learning experience. I know I got all the notes right, but what was really helpful to me was for them to say, Jim, you did a great job getting that part down. But for it to be playable by real musicians in a studio, you're missing all the dynamic markings, all of, bowings, all that kind of stuff. And it's a whole other language. And, you know this, the trick with translating between the two worlds is I might have 12 tracks in my DAW of violins, all contributing to one part. Because one library might be great at the attack, another might be better at sustain or legato lines or whatever, and so it's a huge job just translating. Because I'm like, man,
you're really you become an editor, really, in a lot of sense. You're just inputting data,
right?
Like part of the job of composing now is really data entry,
right?
It's like manipulating all those elements, which really sucks, especially when you record it with an orchestra. And I think we would both say that as good as samples are, they truly suck compared to a real orchestra.
Right. It's so frustrating because you get this idea in your head and you know exactly what it should sound like, and you spend an hour trying to finesse this line of MIDI data, drawing controller curves. Okay, I got the expression right. Now I need to play with controller number 83 for the attack time or whatever. And at the end of it, you're like, man, it sounds pretty good, but it still doesn't match what I hear in my head.
Sure.
So it's really, you're painting by.
I would say this.
Proxy.
Don't you think that when I hear composers' demos or people in my film score class, one of the classic blunders, I think, when you're trying to recreate an orchestra, is you really need to write for the samples you own.
Totally.
Because if you don't, as cool as your idea is, if it sounds phony at the end of the day, and you're not recording with a real orchestra, then what good is it? You know? So there's a million ways to write a cue, I think. You don't need every instrument of everything. Back in UCLA, they would make us write cues with whatever instruments they could get to the class that week. They wouldn't have a whole orchestra, but we made it work. You know, and so the same thing I think with sample libraries.
They're handcuffs in a way, but that can be good.
Yeah.
If like you said, if you write to them, and it's a double-edged sword because it does limit you. But on the other hand, if you know how to work within those confines, you can get great results. I did I guess it's 2 years ago now, I had a girl approach me from out of town who went through the list of Nashville guys. She wanted, she'd won a contest with Ryan Seacrest, this Disney thing, and she wanted a 15 song medley of all the big Disney hits. And she asked if I'd program it because she didn't have a big budget, obviously couldn't record live orchestra.
I remember when you posting something about that.
Oh my gosh. And I thought, this will either be the dumbest thing I've ever tried or the boldest. And I knew if I had time I could do it. And it turned out I was able to do it around other projects. And number one, it was a huge learning experience. But the trick with that is I wanted to write within the samples, but I also had to capture as much of the original orchestrations as I could. So I had to do it all by ear. There was no sheet music or anything like that. And it was a massive challenge, but it ended up being really fun because I got to play with voicings that I typically wouldn't use in my day-to-day stuff. But it was a great exercise in how do I sell these samples is the real thing. Because if this, it's kind of like the, George Lucas used to talk about the Yoda puppet in Empire Strikes Back. If that puppet looks like a puppet, the whole movie fails. And it's the same with working with samples. If you're having to do that, if you can't work with the live players, you gosh darn, you better make them sound
Sure.
not real, but you know, as real as possible.
I think too, for me, like if I get a project like that that's insane from an orchestration standpoint, and it's going to just take me another week of my time, I would rather bring in a handful of players and use some of my budget to just overdub violins for bowing and stuff like that, because it's amazing how just a small little ensemble will, the realism will go up so much.
Totally.
You know.
Totally. Yeah. Humanity. It's all about trying to squeeze some in there. That's another. Of course, tons of people do that when you're working with samples, trying to get at least some live players in there. It just elevates it.
It makes a big difference.
Well, anything else we should cover in our first little foray?
That's pretty good. We kind of went into a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Maybe we should ask people what do you want to, what do you want us to cover in the future? What kind of stuff? Gear questions or anything like that? Shoot us emails or Facebook messages.
Yeah, I would like to put put my filmscoreseminar.com, which is my next thing up there. Yeah, y'all,
if you have any interest in doing music for film, TV, that kind of stuff, you should check out Michael's class coming up. It's you tell me the details.
My next class, if you go to filmscoreseminar.com, the next class is November 7th, and basically what we do, it's 5 weeks, it's every Monday night. Unfortunately, it's here in Nashville, and there's not an online yet, but we're working towards that. Every week you'll get a new scene from an actual feature film. We'll be breaking down all the elements of the orchestra, learning how they're used, emotionally and psychologically in film. We'll be breaking down the sample libraries. You'll get to hear all the different libraries, and so you can make better choices for what you want to buy. And then every week we listen to each other's music and we critique in a real positive atmosphere. And most of the guys, and we also talk about the business. Like at the end of the class, I show you how to go out and start making money like right away with this in different things. So anyway, I hope you check it out. November 7th is the first class, filmscoreseminar.com, and it's here in my studio. But it's limited to like 10 guys or girls.
Unless you bring vast amounts of coffee, maybe.
Yeah. Maybe.
Well, that's it, man. I think we got a good first one.
Yeah. Awesome.
Pleasure seeing you, as always.
You too, bro.